Now it's time for our weekly energy update with Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy.
Well, thank you for that, Julie. And as we saw last week, no movement on the two wars, both in Ukraine and now in Gaza, means that markets are really fumbling when it comes to trying to figure out a price. That's critical because we don't really know where oil and gas prices are going in the long term, even in the medium term. There seems to be signals that have traditionally in the past kept energy prices in check. Things like the raising of interest rates from the US Fed and to a lesser extent even our own bank. But that doesn't seem to be forthcoming. And so the markets really have to sooner or later pay more attention to fundamentals. If they do that, they'll find that in the case of diesel, in the case of gasoline, and certainly in the case of oil, the world is likely to have a little bit less of. Now, we've had a pretty significant temperature change, not just in Ontario and Quebec and the West, the prairies, but we're now seeing what could be more extended periods of time of colder weather much earlier than anticipated. Now, this, of course, is kind of strange given that we had the hot summer, but what has affected that hot summer may very well determine El Nino, the effect on this winter, and it looks like it's going to be a very cold one. If that is the case, then diesel, natural gas, and propane futures will begin to rise and reflect that sudden and dramatic and early demand, which of course brings into focus why the federal government insists that only one region of the country, the Atlantic provinces, using heating oil, should get an exemption on carbon taxes, while propane and natural gas used in the rest of the country does not. This sort of one-off and fly by the direction of the wind approach of the government demonstrates not just how shallow and unprincipled the carbon policy is of this government, the fact that it's layered on with a second carbon tax, regulations on everything from methane to building codes to just transition, trying to find kicking people out of good paying jobs, some of the best we have in this country, in an industry, by the way, oil and gas, which is still the golden goose for Canada, really demonstrates the extent to which we are going to have adult and very serious discussion about getting rid of net zero fantasies. These policies are not helpful to Canada. They're pernicious to Canada, and they won't just stop in terms of ability and sapping our ability to make ends meet. They're likely to significant, serious questions about why we would want to remove or reduce the amount of food that we produce in this country, or why we would want to imperil Canadians and our nation, one of the coldest countries in the world, from getting access to things that work. I come from a family of electricians, many who've worked in the trades, plumbing, HVAC. Heat pumps, generally speaking, in colder weather don't work. As I've said many times before, and people may not like to hear it, generally speaking, they're garbage and a waste of money, and they have no business being used in Canada. You want to use them for warmer climates, use them for air conditioning, that's great, but they're not very helpful to Canada. And so when it comes to gas prices, this is, of course, leading us to the conclusion that what you see today is what you're going to pretty much see this time next week. No big increases, no decreases. We're going to stay at an average of about $1.52 for a liter of gasoline in Canada, and you're likely to see diesel prices being the only outlier. And that's critical here, Julie, because as we get colder, diesel is a proxy not just for jet fuel and for transportation, agriculture and mining, in other words, economic activity. Heating oil, stove oil, furnace oil is still used in a lot of parts, not just of Canada, but the United States. And so that is likely to see an increase. We saw earlier this week futures, at least here in Canada, central Canada, Quebec, Ontario, to a lesser extent the Maritimes and the prairies, not British Columbia's lower mainland and Vancouver Island. We saw the spot price, the wholesale price for diesel go up about 10 cents a liter. I don't expect that to happen again, but I do believe that those prices are going to be sustained. And so while much of our focus may be on gasoline pricing, the real economic impact on all of us, whether we drive or not, is on the price of diesel. And paying attention to it, I think, is far more important for those out there who are new to the idea of gas price predictions and gas price futures. I'm glad to see more people have finally, after 20 or 30 years, taken an interest in this field. But I think we have to also consider other implications for the country, which is what happens when you have an oil and gas sector that's been really hamstrung, for which the Canadian dollar is now, as a result, much weaker, adding more pressure, I might add, to the purchase power of Canadians and indeed being inflationary. And as the Bank of Canada has now had to finally admit, carbon taxes and green policies are in fact very inflationary and very corrosive to the bottom line of Canadians. That's it for this week, Julie. Let's get back next week and see how the second week looks in this great month of November.
Thanks for that, Dan.